Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is November 29th, 2024, Friday, November 29th, 2024. And our first story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled The Haunting of the Kane Cemetery. All that's left of the town of Kane, Wyoming is a railroad marker and old bridge abutments. It's an isolated place which proved a harsh landscape to live in 100 years ago, and not all who were buried in the town's cemetery found their eternal peace. With a backdrop of the Bighorn Mountains, what started out as a mining camp was located 12 miles away, east of Lovell, and 2 miles south of the Shoshone River. The settlement started in 1895 when Henry Lovell opened a post office. The railroad arrived in 1906, located on the Chicago, Quincy, and Burlington Railroad. A small depot was built and used as a shipping point for sheep, cattle, and lumber. The town grew and became an important trading post for those who did not live near the luxuries of a bigger town. Officially, the town was established in 1912. It was named after Riley Kane, who himself was a perplexing mystery. He did not know his real age since his parents died when he was a small child, and he was adopted by strangers. Riley Kane didn't count his age until he was between 12 to 15 years old. Based on the estimate he gave of his age when he died in 1914 at the ranch of Robert A. Rath, he was about 101 years old. He has spent most of his life prospecting in the mountains, and his granite marker at the Shell Cemetery was raised by his fellow Freemasons. Within 20 years, the town had a bank, 2 general stores, 2 hotels, a motel, a dance and pool hall, and a school. No liquor was ever served at the town. Nearby was the Kane Ferry, the only crossing of the Bighorn River north of Graybull. Like many frontier towns, settlers came from different parts of the country. Such was the story of James Fleming Waters, who married Luella Van Alstine in 1898. They were both from Ohio. He was 30 years old and she was 26. She'd married once before in 1891 to Ulysses Grant Hill. However, it was a short-lived marriage, which produced a daughter named Hazel, who was born in 1892. She would go on to adopt her stepfather's surname of Waters. The couple settled in the town of Kane and had 3 children of their own. But perhaps it was heartbreak that killed Luella in 1907, since her firstborn child Hazel died 2 years before. Poor Hazel's parents seemed to have been born under crossed stars, since her biological father, Ulysses Grant Hill, who had gone on to remarry but continued to live in Iowa, died in 1911 after being run over by a train. After the death of Luella, James Waters married the following year a woman 16 years his junior. No doubt he sought not only a wife, but a mother for his young daughters. Her name was Hannah Snyder, but she went by her middle name of Matilda. The family lived on their Wyoming ranch, and it's unknown if James Waters suspected his bride would turn out to be the most unfitting of mothers. The marriage was fruitful, and by March 1921 they had 7 children, and Matilda was pregnant with an 8th child. Matilda waited until her husband was gone to visit his married daughter to do the unthinkable. As James was returning, he heard shots ring out. The doors were locked and the shades were drawn. He had to break down the door to gain entry. In one version, he found his wife already dead on the floor. In another, she had shot herself in the chest, but she was still alive, and he had to drop her. She had killed 4 of her children and wounded the 2 oldest. At the inquest, James Waters revealed that Matilda had brooded profoundly over the death of Mary, their 1-year-old daughter who died in 1920. What was more telling is that before the birth of each child, she had been irrational for varying periods. She had been confined for a time in a Nebraska sanitarium, but was released in 1920 as cured. James said Matilda had made threats to kill the children and herself before the tragedy, and sadly he had not believed her. Matilda and the 4 children were buried in Kane Cemetery at Bighorn County. Present day, it is part of the Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area. Described as a Bighorn Basin pioneer, James Fleming Waters died in 1953 at the age of 85. never having to suffer again the death of any of his children as they died in old age. By then, the little town of Kane was on its way to becoming a ghost town. In 1965, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation condemned the town to make way for Yellowtail Reservoir. None are sure when the sighting of the Blue Lady at the Kane Cemetery started. This is supposed to be Matilda Waters searching for her murdered children. There are reports of a blue light around the cemetery, and it's also been sighted crossing the road. The cemetery was in use since 1903. Some families lived in Ionia, a small Mormon settlement about a mile and a half from the graveyard. Others were residents of Kane. The main economy for the area was growing sugar beets for the Great Western Sugar Company in Billings, Montana. There were also ranches that ran cattle. In 2009, the Kane Cemetery was vandalized. Between Halloween and November 13th, 31 grave sites were desecrated. Some were pushed over, some broken, and others were spray painted. But perhaps there are other restless spirits who could be to blame for the eerie happenings at Kane Cemetery. In 1917, Fred Meacham, probably Meacham, was found near death in front of the house of W. Stackhouse in Lovell. Meacham, 45, was his employee and was found with a knife wound in the back. This injury had caused him to bleed to death. Stackhouse said that Meacham was crazed with liquor and that he appeared to be insane and battered his own head, tore off his clothes, and eventually caught himself on a wire, which is what inflicted the wound in his back. W.F. Stackhouse, 40, was sent to jail and charged for the murder. However, it would take 6 months before he was brought to trial for the murder of Fred Meacham. The outcome of the trial is unknown, but it must have been in his favor, since in 1922, W.H. Stackhouse was president of the National Implement and Vehicle Association. It's never specified where Meacham was buried, but perhaps he lies buried in one of the unnamed graves at Kane Cemetery. And there's a short little story which shows that even some of the most out-of-the-way places, horrific things do happen. And now there's only a few buildings left of this little town of Kane. The most significant, of course, is the cemetery, but I've looked at a legend and there's more. There's many graves there that are unknown, because at the time that they were buried, they were using just wood markers, and whatever was there has long since disappeared as far as who was there. So yeah, they have, as a matter of fact, when you look, they know where the burials are, they just don't know who's in them. So who knows if Meacham and who else is buried there and really are the ones that are causing the trouble and not Matilda Waters. Anyway, next story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled Amy's Exorcism. In November 2006, under unusual circumstances, a woman fell from the second story of her home. She was left paralyzed below the waist. She had been sitting on the sill, and afterward she claimed it was not a deliberate suicide attempt. According to Amy Stamatis, it started a few months before the incident. Once, when she was just doing her usual household chores, a strange voice invaded her thoughts. It was loud and clear, as if someone was standing right next to her and whispering terrible things in her ears. The voice said obscene things and told her to commit suicide, as well as placing dark thoughts in her head. She was also suffering from strange ailments, and being a nurse, she believed she was undergoing a mental breakdown and sought the help of mental health professionals. Amy worked at Baptist Health Medical Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she had just finished a 24-hour shift as a med flight nurse. On this particular day, her patient was suffering from burns, and after completing a report about her patient, she found herself walking aimlessly around the emergency room hallways. Patients and staff stated Amy was wandering around growling in a deep animalistic tone. Unbelievably, she found she had forgotten how to do her job, and she went home after this. Her confusion persisted, and Amy, who was a marathon runner, found she couldn't run straight, and even simple tasks like picking out her clothes escaped her. The frequency of these mental fogs gradually increased, and she forgot what she was doing. Sometimes she even forgot her name, as if her mind was temporarily erased. Fearing a nervous breakdown, She discussed it with her husband and then began a round of visiting doctors and psychiatric hospitals. She received different diagnoses and was prescribed antidepressants like they were candy. The worst, though, is that her behavior became unpredictable, and the voices didn't stop. At a family gathering, she stripped off her clothing, and as a patient at the hospital for which she used to work, she screamed at her former co-workers. Amy and her husband sought other help and went to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. She broke away from the physicians, ran to a parking garage, and climbed 8 stories, threatening to jump. She was finally talked down by her husband and the police. The voices continued. Then came the day she was sitting on the sill of the window in her house. When Amy jumped from the 2nd story, she hit the hard patio concrete below and shattered her back in 3 places and pierced both lungs. Amy did not belong to the downtown Church of Christ in Searcy, but nonetheless they held a prayer service for her after she fell. During her hospitalization, a woman named Cindy Lawson, a Pentecostal and church member, visited her bedside. Lawson claims she could heal those suffering from terminal illnesses and also raising the dead. She then described something inside of Amy. She called them demons. A friend of Amy told her that Cindy Lawson came to pray over her. The Lord spoke to me and told me to go to the hospital to cast the demons out of her, Lawson said. I could feel something churning. I could see the demons. She described Stamatis as being wide-eyed. She said that then something inside of Amy growled at her and said, "Why are you here?" Lawson anointed Amy's forehead with oil and commanded, "Lord, in the name of Jesus, I command that these demons release her and come out of her, and that she comes to her right mind in Jesus' name." The Spirit of the Lord fell into that room, Lawson recalled. The problem lies in the similarity of symptoms between demonic possession and the diagnosis of schizophrenia or epilepsy. Dr. Richard Gallagher, a psychiatrist who works with Catholic priests to differentiate between those suffering from mental illness versus a demonic possession, points out. In 2016, he wrote an article in the Washington Post where he described the following, quote, "The same habits that shape what I do as a professor and psychiatrist, open-mindedness, respect for evidence, and compassion for suffering people, led me to aid in the work of discerning attacks by what I believe are evil spirits, and just as critically, differentiating these extremely rare events from medical conditions. But careful observation of the evidence presented to me in my career has led me to believe that certain extremely uncommon cases can be explained no other way." End quote. Dr. Gallagher warned that there has to be caution among clergy members in seeing the devil everywhere. He states that exorcists should have many years of training and show a great deal of sobriety, prudence, and holiness. In 2018, the Vatican changed and expanded its annual exorcism course due to an increased demand. Within the Catholic Church, only a priest properly trained and given permission by a bishop is allowed to perform the solemn exorcism. Amy Stamatis described where she had been diagnosed with porphyria, which is a rare chemical imbalance with symptoms of seizures, abdominal pain, mental confusion, and nervous system dysfunction. She now believes she was possessed and the medical field could not help her because they don't believe in it. Despite the extreme portrayal seen in the 1973 film The Exorcist, it does not present the more common form of spiritual attack, which is demonic influence or temptation. The next level is demonic oppression, which is more ordinary, and it can be addressed with Catholic sacraments, blessings, and prayers. Addiction and violence are other examples of demonic manipulations. Monty Cox, Damatis' preacher and the dean of the College of Bible and Ministry at Harding University, said, "On one hand, there are those infatuated with the demonic and being drawn into a kind of magic that sounds more faithful than it is. And on the other hand, there are those suckered by a modern worldview that says such things don't actually exist." Amy Stamatis cannot recall her exorcism, but her family noted a change in her immediately, and she has not regressed to her prior behavior. There is a dearth of information surrounding this event and what led up to it. Why would a married nurse with children be targeted for possession or obsession? Had she ever had any similar events during her life or in her family history? Did she have a history of suicidal ideations, even in her distant past? Did she have to continue with her medical treatments for porphyria afterwards? Or did that disappear as well? None of these questions were ever answered in the reports about this incident in one way or another. That's something I think it was very interesting because obviously this lady was a nurse. She was a trained professional. She had been around probably not only sick people, but on occasion, people that might have had some type of mental illness, behavior disorder. So you would think she would, I don't know, be understanding. And again, if she's already, why would somebody sit on the sill of a window or anybody allow her to sit on the sill? And see, that's the thing. They never describe, was she by herself in the room when she sat on the sill of the window? Or was somebody there? And if she was with somebody, if already this person is displaying this weird behavior and she almost jumped from an eighth floor garage, I wouldn't let somebody like that near a window, period. So, and it's almost like she's saying she jumped, but when she jumped, it wasn't her decision. That kind of thing. And again, it's very vague. Like, did the possessions thing stop? But she still was sick. Like I mean, obviously, besides her paralysis, was the peripheria, did that disappear, or like it kind of leaves this big question mark. So even though it's a very interesting story, I still find that a lot of the details pertaining to it are kind of like, was this something supernatural or was it strictly like Dr. Gallagher points out? Because I've read a lot on him and he's very good. He does a lot of good work for exorcists prior to any type of exorcism taking place, where he makes sure that this person really genuinely is not suffering from some type of mental problem, whatever the case might be. So I don't know. What do you think? Was she really possessed, obsessed, oppressed? Or was something going on in her head? I don't know. Let's go on to the next story, also out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories. And this is titled, just since we're talking about the devil, let's keep in that vein. Something Wicked This Way Comes. In a duplex across from a preschool and middle school, police made a disturbing discovery in 1990. Three strange people lived there. They were self-proclaimed Satanists and killers for hire. Coral Springs police closed a 5-month investigation, which they opened when neighbors complained of disturbances and drug activity at a 3-bedroom duplex located in a quiet residential neighborhood. An undercover detective named Robert Vernon infiltrated the small group, perhaps seeking to discover a drug trafficking hub, but it blossomed into something unexpected. The occupants of the duplex were Linda Barsaz, 34, who described herself as the high priestess of the coven, her husband Michael Barsaz, 29, who shared his wife with Julian Samaniego, 18, a Colombian teenager, who was described as Linda's slave and was her constant companion, including sharing the same bed every night with her. Linda Barsaz moved to Florida from Massachusetts 6 years before and had lived at the address for about a year. The group was involved in selling drugs, stealing religious objects, and recruiting new members, mostly juveniles. In preparation for contact with the group, Vernon studied a satanic Bible, so there must have been some intel that they were into the occult. The day of the arrest, Vernon was to be initiated into the cult, which would take place after he buried a valuable object in the woods, desecrated a holy object or building, and the evening would end in a night of lust. The group told Vernon they had no problem killing people or slitting their throats. They even alluded to being involved in witnessing other murders. Linda Barsaz and Samaniego offered to set up a meeting to help Vernon murder a person for $20,000. $10,000 before and the other half afterward. They were unaware the person Vernon wanted to knock off was fictional and didn't exist. Inside a closet, officers found an altar with a bowl filled with coins, medallions, human teeth, and locks of hair. There was also marijuana, a knife, and yellow, black, blue, and red candles. Police also found a picnic basket used to carry tools for outdoor rituals. Authorities seized a gold chalice and bowl that were stolen from St. Andrew's Catholic Church, which was situated 2 miles away from the duplex. Linda Barzaz and Julian Samaniego were charged with conspiracy to solicit first-degree murder. Samaniego was able to bail out, but a judge denied bail for Linda. She begged the judge she needed Valium, which she had been taking for 5 years. The judge ordered a medical check for her. Michael Barzaz was charged with possession of marijuana and possession of drug paraphernalia and bonded out for $100. He said his wife was a paralegal who had been out of work for a year because of depression. In October 1990, Linda Barzaz pled guilty to conspiracy to solicit second-degree murder and was sentenced to a year and a day in state prison. She was given credit for the 5 months she had been sitting in jail. If she would have faced her original charge of conspiracy to solicit first-degree murder, she would have faced a sentence of 12 to 17 years in prison. The defense lawyer said his client never planned to carry out a murder, only to scam Vernon out of the money. Michael Barzaz denied that they were Satanists and were only involved in earth worship. Considering they were stealing and desecrating religious objects, that was probably a lie. Only a year before, South Florida had a rash of murder mysteries with occult overtones. On July 2nd, 1988, the nude body of Patty Lanza, age 4, was found in some bushes on Little Torch Key. Police found her jumpsuit and underwear in the woods, not far from the body. The child had been sexually assaulted with a blunt object, then clubbed on the head with a different weapon. 2 weeks later, Sherry Perisho, 39, a one-time beauty queen known in the neighborhood as the Rainmaker, was murdered. She talked about the magic of Saturn and claimed she could make it rain, which is how she earned her moniker. Known to live on the street, she slept on a green dinghy. She had been drowned, her throat was slashed with so much brutality her spine was severed. Her body was cut up and the heart removed. She was reeled in by a group of fishermen at Big Pine Channel Key who thought they had landed a large fish. 5 months later, the nude body of Lisa Sanders, 20, was found on No Name Key. She was a small woman, 4 feet 9 inches in height, and weighing 105 pounds. The victim was raped. Her organs, heart, and eyes had been removed. She was dragged with a rope or chain around her neck down a coral rock roadway behind a vehicle for about half a mile while she was still alive. Ironically, Lisa had beat leukemia, which she had been diagnosed with when she was 9 years old. In October 1988, she moved into a trailer Big Pine Key near her parents' winter home. It was December 1988, 2 months later, when Lisa Sanders arrived at a party on No Name Key about 7:30 p.m. There were about 120 teenagers and young adults attending, and 2 hours later Lisa wanted to leave. However, her friends wanted to stay and refused to drive her home. They saw Sanders walk away from the party alone. There is only one way into the small island that measures a mile wide and 2 miles long. That was the last time she was seen alive. Her family reported her missing that night. Later, there was debate if her organs had been removed by vultures who were pecking at her remains when she was discovered. However, the extent and method of the organ removal could not have been done by animals. Missing from the body were most of the heart, brain, eyes, neck muscles, appendix, colon, vagina, left fallopian tube, ovaries, bladder, thyroid gland, and parts of the lung. Sanders' parents lived next door to the Glendennings, Patty Lanza's grandparents. In 2015, Crime Stoppers offered a $2,500 reward in the case, but as of 2024 it remains unsolved. A few days later, a pentagram was found sprayed on the ground about 2,000 feet from where the body was found. The sheriff said several satanic groups practiced throughout the Keys. By the summer of 1989, police were looking at Stephen Michael Bologna, a 35-year-old treasure hunter who had known 2 of the victims. He had taken Patty Lanza's mother to a party in Little Torch Key the day before the child's body was discovered. He also dated Sherry Perisho. Bologna said he was elsewhere when both murders occurred. When the investigation was ongoing, Bologna left town for an undisclosed location, supposedly due to the rumors floating about his possible involvement in the crimes. A few years later, he legally changed his surname. The police did not find any evidence to tie him directly to any of the murders. Buck Sandage, his landlord, said it was just a coincidence he knew both women, and described him as a lonely guy who was always on the lookout for a good wife, but at times ended up with women with a lot of problems. He was known to pick up girls hitchhiking on the highway, which is US 1, but most of them were usually tramps, and he would just say bye. He motored about in a small boat looking for treasure and had a yellow tow truck he drove around fixing people's cars. Bologna had his 5-year-old son living with him. Sherry Parisio had lived with him for about 3 weeks, and the landlord said that Bologna felt sorry for her. He fixed the small dinghy where she slept. It was anchored beneath a bridge, and this was where she was killed. Bologna also fixed things for Deborah Glendenning Lanza, Patty's mother. She was known never to wear shoes because she just didn't like them. The day Patty was murdered, he had taken Deborah Lanza and her 4 children along with his son to the party in Little Torch Key. Some reported that Patty's mother seemed disoriented or under the effects of drugs when the realization was made her daughter was missing. Patty Lanza's grandparents and Lisa Sanders' parents believed the murders were linked in some way to a satanic cult. Reverend Daniel Knox, pastor of the Big Pine Christian Center, said he had pentagrams formed in stone on the porch outside the church, and someone had once hung a dead chicken on their church door. It was noted that the murders had brought attention to the problem of Satanism in the Keys. Rhonda Poore worked at a church in Marathon. She said she had counseled 6 or 7 recovering cultists who were once active members of Satanist groups in the area. None of the organs removed from the victims were ever found. According to Dade County Medical Examiner Joseph Davis, who was a consultant on one of the Keys murders, he said, there's a very compelling link in these 3 murders, geography and time. However, despite the small population in the area, the leads dried up, and so did any answers as to who had committed these grisly crimes. In 1996, a decapitated corpse was found floating in a rock pit in Oakland Park, a city in Broward County, Florida. He was a man estimated to be between 20 to 30 years old, and his hands were missing as well. Coincidentally, the city is located about 11 miles from Coral Springs, where the cult operated from in 1990. Police then started to piece together other similar murders. In Hillsborough County, they also had a body with no head or hands. The unidentified male was 30 to 50 years old, and he had a small homemade tattoo known as a pachuco on his inner left ankle. 3 other Florida counties would end up calling the authorities at Oakland Park Homicide Department because they had similar murders committed in their jurisdiction. In Miami, detectives had no leads in the murder of Darlene Toller, 35, a prostitute and mother of 3. She was killed in November 1995, and the corpse was left without a head and her heart. Her body was stuffed in a black plastic bag and left along a road in the remote western end of Dade County. The murder of Sherry Parisio was recalled, and that she had been killed in a grisly manner, where someone had cut her body from neck to pelvis and removed her heart. 7 years later, her killer still walked free. In 2004, investigators were looking at these older cold cases from South Florida to see if they were similar to recent slayings in Seminole County. Don Esslinger, Seminole County Sheriff, said the MO and type of behavior at this scene was very similar to those in Monroe and Dade. The crime he was referring to here were the stabbing death of Terry Brandt, 46, and her niece, Michelle Jones, 37. Carl Charlie Brandt, 47, committed the horrendous crime as Hurricane Ivan bore down on the Florida Keys, and he and his wife had evacuated their home in Big Pine Key. Jones, an executive at the Gulf Channel, had opened her home in Maitland to her aunt and her husband. Brandt's body was found hanging in the garage by a yellow bedsheet. He left no note. It would take many months for the police to unravel the secret life of Charlie Brandt. What many in the area where he lived did not know is that Brandt had killed his 8-month pregnant mother, Elsie, his unborn brother, and seriously injured his father, Herbert, when he was 13 years old. He had used a Luger pistol he took from his father's nightstand drawer. Then he attempted to kill his sister Angela as well, but he had run out of bullets. He then tried to strangle her. She was able to soothe her brother and then ran off to a neighbor's house screaming for help. The only motive police could find for the teenager's berserk behavior was that his father had shot an ailing dog earlier that day. Up to that moment, the family was ordinary. Mr. and Mrs. Brandt immigrated from Germany after World War II in 1955. Herbert Brandt went on to work for International Harvester, a German-based company. By 1971, the Brandts and their 4 children lived in a tree-lined neighborhood in Fort Wayne, Indiana, at 6208 Stony Brook Drive. Carl Brandt never offered an explanation for his acts. He told the judge, "I didn't really want to. It was like I was sort of programmed. I hesitated, but the next thing I knew, I had shot them." A 13-year-old using the word programmed was very unusual. His sister Angela described where he had a glazed look in his eyes when he was attacking her. For the remainder of her life, she would remain afraid of her brother. 3 separate psychiatric evaluations failed to determine what triggered the shooting. Charlie Brandt had no diagnosable mental illness, and it was determined he was not hallucinating at the time. He was evaluated to be mature for his age and did well in school with no behavioral issues, at least until the day of the murders. Due to his age, Brandt was never criminally charged, and he spent a year in a state-run mental health facility. A year later, his father petitioned for his release, and he was turned over to his care. Brandt's 2 younger sisters were unaware he had killed their mother. They were told she had died in a car accident and did not learn the truth until 2004. Herbert Brandt had remarried, and to escape the notoriety of his son's actions, he moved the family to Ormond Beach, Florida in 1972. For some unknown reason, 2 years later, he moved back to Indiana with his daughters and new wife. Charlie Brandt, already 17, stayed behind in Florida with his sister Angela at their grandparents' home. One has to wonder if Herbert Brandt feared his son would murder his wife and 2 young daughters, and felt only hundreds of miles could safeguard them. After the double murder in 2004, the authorities questioned if during the intervening years Charlie Brandt had claimed other victims. His passport, credit card receipts, and any other record that could be retrieved were scoured by police to determine the details of his life in Florida. After spending 1 year at Central State Hospital, something that aided the police was that Brandt kept meticulous mileage records. Authorities received inquiries as far away as Germany and Holland. Details were not disclosed, but it's believed they were comparing cold cases with any visits from Charlie Brandt in their country. It was surmised that Terry Brandt was aware of her husband's past, and in fact suspected him in the death of Sherry Pericho. She had even confided her suspicions to Jim Graves, who was once married to Angela Brandt. Authorities later found that Terry Brandt kept a diary that confided some marital troubles, but no violence. Both women were repeatedly stabbed. Terry had defensive wounds on her left hand. She was found on the living room couch. Her husband pulled down her panties and posed her body. Her niece's body was found in the master bedroom. She had been raped and decapitated. Brandt had also used a kitchen knife to cut on her body with the skill of a surgeon. He removed her breast, abdominal wall, liver, a segment of the colon, and intestines. The left leg was removed at the femoral head, and her upper left arm had been partially removed. He cut her chest cavity open and removed her organs, including the heart. Police believe that Brandt had fantasized about committing this act for years. After killing the woman, he had cut apart Victoria's Secret bras and underwear and left them scattered around Joan's room. He also left his bloody clothes at the foot of the bed. Several knives used in the crime were found in the house. He changed into clean clothing before hanging himself. Due to the search of the Brandt's home in Big Pine Key, it was found that Victoria's Secret catalogs were addressed to Charlie, not Teresa. The savagery of Brandt's attack on his wife and her niece were used as a comparison to unsolved murder cases. One of the unsolved cases police examined was the death of Carolyn Sullivan on September 20th, 1978. The 12-year-old disappeared from a school bus stop in Austin. 2 weeks later, her head was found in a paint can in a remote area of Deltona. Her body was never recovered. By then, Brandt had moved in with his best friend's family after his own return to Indiana, and he left his grandparents' home. While having dinner, the family talked about the death of the girl, and he started laughing maniacally, spitting food from his mouth. The family was so disturbed they asked him to move out. Around that time, Brandt had graduated from Seabreeze High School and went on to Daytona Beach Community College, where he earned an associate's degree. He was working in Flagler County. In the intervening years, Brandt had met and married Teresa Helfrich in 1986. They had moved to Big Pine Key the month before Pericho's murder. Their house was 4 blocks from the bridge. Otis Toole, Jeffrey Dahmer, Gerard Schaefer, and Henry Lucas were all operating around the same time period in Florida. Gerard Schaefer specifically mentioned No Name Key as a location where women were taken for the use of a resident satanic cult. Some believed it was no coincidence that Brandt bought a property in Big Pine Key. Brandt worked as a tech for Lockheed Martin Corps, and later during the investigation, Hans Kemmler, one of Charlie's co-workers, said there was no hint of anything seriously wrong in Brandt's past. When Darlene Toller was killed in 1995, Brandt worked as a radar technician on Cudjoe Key, a job that required him to travel to Miami from time to time. Later, when police reviewed his travel log, they found a 100-mile trip to where Darlene was last seen. Authorities believe that Charlie drove from the Keys to Miami to hunt for a victim. Initially, the police said that a search of the Brandt's home on Big Pine Key uncovered evidence that confirmed the theory that he was involved in other murders. His computer records showed he visited internet sites having to do with death fetish, erotica, snuff films, and erotic horror. There was also an anatomy poster of the female skeletal and muscular system on the back of the couple's bedroom door. By October 2005, the police had pored over Brandt's records, including journals his wife kept. Their search had them look at 26 unsolved murders in Florida that were committed since he moved to the state in 1973. These cases were selected by an FBI computer program as being similar to Brandt's M.O. There were also 400 cases of missing women. A co-worker of Brandt's who worked on a radar blimp facility in Cudjoe Key told police that Brandt often talked about his wife's niece and how beautiful she was. However, he only referred to her as Victoria's Secret. In 2006, authorities pinned the murder of Sherry Pericho on Charlie Brandt. This was based on a combination of similarities between the stabbing deaths and eyewitness identification of a man crossing the road shortly after the murder. Terry Brandt had also told acquaintances that she saw him wet and bloody the night of the murder. When she asked him what happened, he responded that he was fishing. Before he met Terry, Brandt worked at Ford Aerospace, an electronic warfare range in Daytona Beach. One big job was known as Fat Albert, a drug intervention project military surveillance system developed in the early 1970s. Big balloons transmitted information about drug smugglers who tried to fly under the radar. Brandt also worked on a private military base in the Bahamas. He would be flown in by helicopter and lived on housing provided by Raytheon. There was a suspicion that he worked with the CIA. He traveled all over the world for his work, supposedly in his tech capacity. Though later it was denied, his employees were fully aware of his background since he was turned down for a pilot's license by them. By 1985, Charlie Brandt had quit his job in the Bahamas and moved to Astor, Florida. He had bought a house with funds it's believed he made from selling cast-off shipments of cocaine he located with the help of Fat Albert. Left floating on the water, he would retrieve them while claiming he was out fishing. It seemed no one ever questioned, including the IRS, how Charlie Brandt was able to build a house in the Florida Keys, which cost him approximately $250,000 in 1987. Reporters were told to leave out details about him and just report the crime when the murder splashed the front page in Florida newspapers. One could only surmise this was done to save face for his employers, past and present. Charlie Brandt's father tried to keep his psychiatric records hidden, and he did not release any of the information. However, the investigators finally obtained them. What was on them has never been revealed, and there is a suspicion they were covering something up that happened in the asylum in Indiana. However, it was Angela Brandt who told authorities about the family's secret and how her brother had become a murderer at the age of 13. In a taped interview with police in 2004, she said that now she could sleep at night. She also filled in gaps about her brother's childhood and their family. She revealed that she herself was a product of an affair between her father and their aunt. Charlie had also had an intimate relationship with her aunt. She described where Charlie had been abused by both of his parents. Angela Brandt also described where there was a family history of mental problems. In the days before Charlie Brandt killed his wife and her niece, he visited with his father Herbert and a younger sister Jessica, who later told police he seemed anxious to return to his home in Big Pine Key. On March 6, 2006, Charlie Brandt was officially named Sherry Pericho's killer, and the case was closed. In the aftermath of Michelle Jones' murder, her father succeeded in passing Michelle Lynn's Law in Florida, which unseals homicide records involving juveniles. The house where Charlie Brandt committed his last crime has been sold 5 times since 2004, The last transaction took place in 2020. As to the murder of Lisa Sanders, the Monroe County Police Department at one time had a person of interest in the case who was imprisoned for a murder in Ohio. His name is Guy Billy Lee Scott, and he lived on Big Pine Key in 1988. He was present at the parties on No Name Key where Sanders was last seen and on Little Torch Key where Patty Lanza was taken from. 2 years later, in July 1990, Scott had moved on to Ohio. He attended a lakeside party in New Paris with a friend, Lisa Buckley. The following day, her battered body was found floating at American Aggregates Lake on Guy Murray Road. She had been assaulted and sodomized. The Buckley family sought the help of a private detective, and Scott was eventually charged and convicted in Lisa's murder. Some point out that it was similar to the Sanders murder since they both had the same name and they were killed after a party. However, there was an element of torture and evisceration that lacked in the Buckley crime. In 2020, Scott was denied an appeal of his sentence of 20 years to life after conviction for murder, rape, and assault by a Butler County jury. Scott based his appeal that an eyewitness lied in court as part of a revenge plot by the Buckley family, and a family member of one of two men he shot and killed in New Paris a year before. In July 1991, Scott was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter following a Preble County trial for multiple New Paris shootings. He was acquitted of murder in the fatal shooting of the second man and not guilty of attempted murder for the shooting of the third man. Was it coincidental that this set of Florida murders has such an occult flavor? Were these perpetrators unknown to each other? Or were they members of a network who not only killed, but did so in the name of a Dark Lord? So you could tell this time period of the 1980s were a lot of things were going on there. I mean, crime is crime, but that you get, I know it's this overkill, there's dismemberment, all these things going on. That it does, that there's, and I've been to the Florida Keys. I know this area extremely well. And when I say that everybody knows one another, the locals, I mean, yes, there's tourists coming and going, but the people that live there, especially back in the 1980s, these islands are small. They're not that big. And people know who everybody else. Here you have grandparents living next door. Patty Lanza's grandparents live next door to the Sanders family. And it's like, that's what I'm saying. Everybody knows. And what are the chances? And nobody knew anything. It's almost like, I want to say, like whoever might have said something says, if I open my big mouth, a person that did this lives here, and I might be next on their list. And also this thing where, was there a little network of Satanists going around? What was going on out there? Remember, when you think of the Florida Keys, everybody thinks of the 7 Mile Bridge and fishing and beautiful weather, which it does have all of that. But at the same time, it makes you wonder, was there an undercurrent, a very dark undercurrent going on? So yeah, all these stories intertwined, these very strange murders that were, there was this element of mutilation going on. And by the way, that house where the murders were committed, the Jones murder was committed, it sold how many times? 6 times? Like in other words, every 3 or 4 years. And I've seen pictures of the house. It's a nice house, okay, but I think there's something going on there, because it's since between 2004 to 2020, that's 16 years, and it's been sold 5 times. So whoever lives there doesn't stay, on an average, no more than 3 years. Makes you wonder what's going on there, huh? All right. Next story is out of Daily Grail, and it's titled "The World's Oldest Ghosts." Let's see. Number 1. Roman ghost, 2,000 years old. According to the British National Trust, some of the oldest ghosts haunting the properties and estates which they look after are to be found at the Treasurer's House, York, UK. The specters of marching Roman soldiers have been seen in the cellars of the historic property, most notably in 1953. 18-year-old apprentice Harry Martindale was working on fitting a new central heating system when he witnessed a figure of a helmeted Roman soldier emerge from a wall. The soldier was visible only from the knees up, as if he were walking at some since buried ground level. The spectral soldier was followed by a horse and at least 19 others who traveled in a procession through the opposite wall. The shocking apparition left young Harry in such a state that he was forced to take 2 weeks off of work. Nevertheless, Martindale kept quiet about his encounter until the 1970s, when he was interviewed by a group of academics for a television documentary. Ghostly Romans are a feature of many haunted UK sites, the former Roman stronghold of Chester being another of the locations where the long-gone occupiers' ghosts have been and continue to be seen. Number 2. Babylonian ghost 3,500 years old. In October 2021, Dr. Irving Finkel, curator of the Middle Eastern Department of the British Museum and author of The First Ghost, Most Ancient of Legacies, spoke to the UK press about a fascinating discovery. An ancient Babylonian clay tablet created circa 1500 BC, which had been in the British Museum's collection since the 1800s, had recently been found to contain an image of a ghost. Dr. Finkel was quoted in The Guardian saying, "It is a Guinness Book of Records object because how could anybody have a drawing of a ghost which was older?" Half of the front of the small tablet is missing, but its back holds instructions for dealing with a ghost which seizes hold of a person and pursues him and cannot be loosed. Essentially, directions for laying a ghost or for an exorcism. The image of the ghost, a bearded male figure, has been overlooked for so long because, fittingly, it was all but invisible. Only by lighting the tablet a certain way, from a certain angle, was it possible to view the image of the spirit. The instructions for quieting the troublesome spirit essentially amount to pairing it up with another lonely ghost so that the two will be occupied with each other and will move on together, ceasing to bother the living. Having described the process for pairing the two in detail, the tablet leaves the would-be ghostbuster/matchmaker with a wonderful final instruction: do not look behind you. Number 3, pre-human ghost 60,000 years old. Why do we never see caveman ghosts? Well, one theory is that we do, and have been doing so for a long time. Hairy hominids is a term cryptozoology commonly uses to describe the category of creature which the likes of Bigfoot, Yeti, Almas, etc. belong to. Bipedal humanoid hair or fur-covered beasts which appear solid one moment and yet seem ethereal the next. Similarities between folkloric Indonesian orang pendek, literally short person, and long-extinct archaic human subspecies Homo florensis, or Floresman, also nicknamed hobbits, have been noted by many. Archaeological evidence of Homo florensis was discovered in 2003 at Liang Bua on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Partial skeletons of at least 9 individuals have been recovered from the site since then, including one complete skull. The oldest of these remains is believed to date from 60,000 years ago. In Bukit Dwabelas, Sumatra, the Orang Rimba people refer to an apparently identical creature to the Orang Pendek as Hantu Pendek, short ghost, being thought of as spectral or even demonic as opposed to flesh and blood creatures. In European folklore, trolls, gnomes, fauns, and other supposedly mythical creatures which dwell in forests, caves, and other wilderness areas also share characteristics with prehumans or early humans. Huge, hairy wild men, also known as wodwos, featured heavily in the literature and presumably the folklore of the High Middle Ages and later. In 2018, UK newspaper The Bristol Post reported that a passenger on a train traveling from Exeter to Bristol Temple Meads spotted a Bigfoot from their window seat. An outbreak of similar sightings took place in 2012 in Tunbridge Wells, Kent, UK, where an 8-foot ape man was reported by several witnesses. While in the USA and other heavily forested countries, arguments for as yet undiscovered populations of flesh and blood hairy hominids will always be made, in England there really is no possibility of such. So, could such encounters the world over actually be glimpses of the ghosts of long deceased human ancestors, cousins? It's certainly a theory. Triassic ghost, 220 million years old. Oh boy, here we go. Excuse me. While Dr. Finkel's Babylonian ghost is not there, the exciting named Mivarong, the snake demon, is listed in the Guinness Book of Records as the oldest ghost. Sightings of a huge 19 to 29 foot long ghostly rattlesnake like creature have been reported on the land surrounding what is now known as Ghost Ranch, formerly Rancho de los Brujos, or Witches Ranch in New Mexico's Rio Arriba County, USA, since the 1500s. Archaeological excavations undertaken in the area since the late 1940s have unearthed more than 1,000 dinosaur and prehistoric reptile specimens. Amongst these finds was a skeleton of a Triassic phytosaur, a huge 29-foot crocodilian ancestor or cousin with an elongated serpentine body. Speculation that the ghostly snake creature sighted in the area could be the specter of this prehistoric monster soon led to Vivarong, the snake monster, being claimed as a candidate for the world's oldest ghost. More recently, in 2016, a hugely toothed jawbone fragment was discovered in the area. This was found to belong not to a phytosaur, but to another, and it has to be admitted, even less snake-like crocodilian ancestor, cousin, the Rhysuchid, sorry. This partial jawbone was found to belong to a previously unknown subspecies of Rhysuchid and was given a new name, Vivarong haydeni. Vivarong in reference to the snake god, and Haydeni in honor of John Hayden, a hiker who in 2002 discovered the New Mexico quarry from which the fossil was collected. The idea that most, if not all, ghosts are all women in black style Victorian ladies almost certainly comes from the many, many ghost stories of that era, and from the fact that so many of our own ghostly tales are based upon or inspired by such. Even though M.R. James, often cited as the master of the ghost story, was writing in Edwardian and First World War England, even his more deliberately commonplace tales often hark back to the then recent Victorian era. The truth is, however, that ghosts have in all probability been with us since the very beginning. The first ghosts almost certainly correspond with the dawn of consciousness. After all, if a ghost appears in a primeval forest and no one is around to witness it, can it really be said to haunt at all? Good question, right? So there you go. Even dinosaur ghosts. Which is, you know what, I'd never thought of that. You know, some of these sightings of cryptids or weird stuff that is there and then is gone, it turns out that it's not real after all. It's just the ghost of whatever that was. Something to entertain the mind. But why not? Again, I will be back soon with eerie news, and that was pretty eerie, let me tell you. I'll be back soon with some more good stuff. Until next time.